Welcome to Disgruntled Wargamer. Today I'm talking about painting models to a tabletop quality. I think a lot of new wargamers beat themselves up about their model paint jobs. Many of us look at YouTube accounts, Instagrams, TikToks, and compare ourselves to pro painters like Ninjon, Miniwitch, and so on. And we make these comparisons without ever having picked up a brush before, outside of arts and crafts in kindergarten anyway. Why are we like this? We're so unfair. Now, I'm not a great painter. My skills are medium at best, in my opinion, and when I try really hard, I can get some good-looking results, but mostly, I just paint to the tabletop level. What does tabletop quality really mean? Well, it's subjective. For some game systems, tournaments require a basic level of paint where all the surfaces have color, there are distinct differences between materials, cloth looks like cloth, metal looks like metal, flesh looks like flesh, and while things like cloth and metal may be the same color, there should be enough of a difference that they can be picked out. Even the base requires some level of effort beyond primer, like flocking or painted details. And that's really it. You don't have to be a two-brush blender, airbrusher, or a freehander to achieve a tabletop-ready quality. You can paint up your models, and from 4 feet away, they're going to look okay. If you want to go for some extra pride, you can try different types of shading and highlighting techniques like washing a model, building them up from dark colors using lighter layers, but that's extra. It's not required. Even flat models look okay from 4 feet away. So how do I go about it? Well, to achieve my tabletop level, I usually paint multiple models all at the same time. I like this assembly line method because it makes things consistent. I prefer to have a whole army at the ready, paint it all up at once so I can use the same colors across multiple units, achieving uniformity. I also prefer to build up my layers. So I will usually go from a darker color to a lighter color, sometimes mixing light tints on the palette, but also just as often using lighter shades as recommended by the paint companies. For example, on this Brine Blood Dire Troll, I'm painting some bone material, which started as a blue-gray, hit by a game color off-white, and now I'm highlighting with some regular model color white. I have found that the thickness of the paint is a little different between the game color and model color lines, and the game color has a resiliency against chipping, which I like, while the model color is a little bit thinner. It seems natural to me to use both lines of paint in a model because they complement each other well, not just in terms of color, but also in terms of composition, thickness. I mean, the mechanical part of the paint that allows you to put it on the model. I don't have to thin the paints by dumping a lot of water in them because they pour fairly thin on the wet palette. The game colors are a little thicker, but they go on in an even manner, and the thickness actually helps with brush control. I just avoid loading a ton of it on my brush, and then the model color, the thinness of it, allows for a really light layer so that my highlighting is subtle and not super contrasted like you might see in a Games Workshop model. I have nothing against highlighting in that extreme way, but it just doesn't suit my style. It doesn't look good to me on the table, and so I tend to avoid it. And that's a key part to all of this is all subjective. It's basically a form of art, and what's pleasing to your eye may not be pleasing to somebody else's eye. And so your tabletop quality may not be the same as somebody else's tabletop quality, and that's okay as long as you ultimately are satisfied with how your paint job looks at the end of the day. Now, before I mentioned uniformity. Sometimes I can't achieve a singular look. Sometimes I take over for another painter. Dessa, my wife, is a true artist. She sometimes bounces from one project to another, and powering through an entire army when you're consistently painting at a higher than tabletop level can be exhausting. She did some amazing work with her Signar Storm Legion army, but eventually became bored and a little frustrated with the project. Part of this is because she was comparing her work to the work of others. Maybe she wasn't getting the recognition she wanted, and some of that I attribute to the standard that miniature painters use when they say what is good or not good on a mini. The Games Workshop way of painting is held to be the norm, and other methods sometimes get sidelined, especially if they're experimental or very subtle. Her colors were absolutely amazing, bringing new combinations to schemes on the table, and it was interesting to see different experiments make it into various models, but her models weren't going to win any golden demons or whatever. She has won local awards for minis, but not within our War Machine player group, which I admit, that can be frustrating. And that's the issue, right? Do we compare ourselves to others? Well, we can, but it's not always the best thing. Now, I'm coming back to Storm Legion. Dessa's moved on to Brinebloods in her army, and its current form has a multitude of paint schemes, sometimes different schemes for each unit. One of her jacks is painted freehand electrical lines on the armor here, and she only painted some of the model's interchangeable parts, so I'm not going to try to make the match. I'm just not capable. My skill level is not that good. So I'm going to leave this model as a melee jack with the spears, hammers, and shields, and I'm going to use the guns and other bits on other jacks. I'm going to paint the remainder of the war jacks in a very basic scheme, using blue and gold for this one, blue and green for another, and blue and red for the third. I'll continue to use her pink plasma throughout the army. I really like how that looks, and I can replicate it. These dudes with the hammers and shields were mostly painted, but have some bits remaining, so all I had to do was add hoses and the grips, and after painting them up, the models will be ready for basing, and I'm going to call them good enough for tabletop. Now, do you see what I did there? Good enough for tabletop. That's the key to achieving a tabletop ready army. Set a limit to yourself. If you know that you don't want to do highlighting and shadowing, or you know that you're not going to do any freehands, be okay with it. Look at your model. Decide whether or not it reads well from a distance. Does it need a lot of shadow and highlight in order to be a model that stands out? Sometimes they don't need all that. Usually, most of us can't see all that detail from 4 feet away. The model just needs to be distinguished as mine so that I don't get confused while playing in a mirror match, and they need to be distinguished from each other so I can keep units independent from each other. Now this guy, with his orange armor and cape, causes problems for me because he is a solo, but he's done in the same colors as one of her units. I may do something to his armor to make him more separate. And yes, that is a 3D printed sword. The original dropped off when the model fell one day, so I'll have to touch that up as well. The remainder of the army is mine to mess with. They will get a boring scheme because boring is easy, and it's time to finish this thing. Tabletop Ready is exactly that. It's about fielding an army that's painted. And speed painting often stops us from achieving display quality models, but that's okay. These models are meant to be played on the table. I'm not storing them in a cabinet so that people can ooh and ah about them. I'm carrying them around in bags across the country, sometimes dropping them on the floor in a fit of clumsiness. That's why it's okay not to spend days on a model. It's perfectly fine to be proud of your tabletop quality. It's fine to have a mismatched army. It's fine to have experimental paint jobs. It's not just about enjoying the painting part of the game, the hobby part of the game, but also playing the game. And sometimes bringing a painted army can enhance your ability to enjoy your gameplay. I don't know how that works. I just know that it does. And what if you don't want to paint? Well, you know what? That's also fine. If you're not a painter, you don't actually have to paint. You can leave it gray. Yeah, I'm saying that right here. You can play it gray, or whatever color it's being printed in or cast in. I don't know anymore. There seem to be more colors coming out now in these game lines. It's totally fine to play unpainted is what I'm saying. Most players won't actually care if you play gray, primed, painted, or whatever. They're just glad to have you at the table so they can throw dice with you. And that's all I have to say on that. You know what to do if you like this video. If you agree with me or disagree, feel free to say so in the comments. I'm here to engage with you. Here's to the enjoyment of the hobby, whichever part of it you enjoy. Have a good time.